Welcome back, everyone. This is Steve McGrath, and you're listening to the Victory Podcast. This week, I am pleased to bring you guys someone that is very unique, and that is Corey Jackson. Why is he unique? Besides the fact that he's an entrepreneur and he's always thinking about how can he make the biggest impact on the world, this is a guy that wanted to be a basketball player, did years of basketball, tried to make it into the NBA, was about to play overseas before he decided, you know what? I'm going to give this football thing a try. He spends 5 years of his life in the NFL between the Browns, the Broncos, spends a year in NFL Europe where he wins Defensive Player of the Year, and now an entrepreneur, founder of Qwerkz. His story is unlike anyone else's. I'm so pleased to bring it to you guys, but before we jump into that, I have to remind you that we are brought to you by Team Builder. Team Builder provides strength and conditioning software to more than 500 high school football programs nationwide, as well as the NFL. So whether you write your own programs, have a full-time strength coach, or you need training programs, Team Builder can make your weight room more efficient, more accountable, and smarter when it comes to measuring your team's progress. Right now, Team Builder is offering a free 10-week spread offense tempo training program when you start a 14-day free trial at teambuilder.com with the promo code VICTORY. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Corey Jackson. Boom. Corey Jackson is in the house. Corey, how are you doing today?
Hey, man, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all mine. And, Corey, although I've only been following you for a pretty short amount of time, I love your LinkedIn content. The one thing that I love most above everything else is that you're a hard guy to label. You were a basketball player turned football player, but you're an entrepreneur. I mean, there is no easy box to put you in. And how, if someone were to ask you, Corey, who are you? What do you do? What's your road been like? What's like the high level one sentence answer to that? Does one even exist?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I don't know. I just think that one, we're not supposed to be in boxes. Like I really do believe that, and I think that I live my life that way, and so I'm always being authentically me, right? And a lot of times people get confined to, oh, this is my brand, so I have to be this way. And I'm just me, so it may vary. My brand may shift and change, and so I don't have the perfect answer for you, but it's just being who I am and doing what I feel in the moment.
Your answer is the perfect answer because there's, like you said, you're not supposed to be put in a box. And I love that because just the little that I've seen, it shines through. And the people that are too personal brand conscious, it can almost come off as phony. But when you don't think about it and you're you, that's all you kind of need to do to stick out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've done a few podcasts, so your story of your humble beginnings in South Carolina are out there. So in the interest of time, because it's such a cool story, but I want to get right to the root of it. From what I could see, you had two transformative moments in your, I don't want to say younger years because one is, being a teenager. But from what I could see, two different people in your lives quit their jobs and it turned something in your brain to make you a completely different person for those two times. And one, of course, is your father quitting a grueling job, working at a cotton mill, and then you yourself quitting your job at Wal-Mart. Yep. So, with those 2 points sort of already out there and pinpointed, can you just talk a little bit about your background and sort of the, your road to even get to JUCO, which we'll kind of go into from there?
Yeah, so you want me to start at the point where I quit my job, or where you want me to start? Because
just sort of what those two moments really meant for you, and how did it sort of form the way you process things and think about everything?
Yeah, so my dad, obviously my idol, right? I had no idea what was happening at the time. I didn't know the impact that it was having. That moment was having on me, and honestly, our family. But he's working this job that's just grueling 16-hour days. And he hit a moment where he realized he could never have what he wanted, right? Like it just was clear, like you can never have what you want as long as you stay here. And in that moment, he decided to let it go, right? Which is a very difficult thing for most people to do, especially when you have a family, bills, like all these things that life is having you be responsible for. But he did it, right? And not only did he did it, it was hard, but then it worked out. And so it made me kind of say, well, if my dad understood that it was something bigger that he wanted, and he was able to put himself at this type of risk, because it's all about perspective, right? 5 kids, a wife, bills, quit his job, don't know what the answer is going to be. I was 19, no kids, no wife, very little bills, right? And so in my mind, I was like, oh, this is easy, because my dad did it with all of this responsibility, and all I have to worry about is me. And so that really made it easier for me to actually quit my job, drive to a bus station, buy a one-way bus ticket, and jump on a bus to go to a city, to a school that I haven't applied for, haven't enrolled in, and nobody knows who I was. And so my dad made it easy for me to do that.
That's so awesome. And I mean, anyone could be like, that is insane. Why on earth would you ever get a one-way bus ticket out of where you're living to some place that you've never been, never applied to? So what was it about Ranger? Why there? Except, of course, at this time, for our listeners that don't know, you're a basketball player. That is what you've been doing for most of your life, and that's what you're focusing on pursuing.
Yeah. So here's why Ranger. That was the last school that someone spoke to me about that had a basketball team. And it was a year prior to that. So I remember it stuck in my head. I was like, it's a school in Ranger that has a basketball team. And so that's how I chose it.
I love it. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of stories in detail here that I'm kind of skipping over, but you do get there. The coach tells you 100 different ways, no, we don't need you, but you get a chance to go play a little pickup and show them between your size and athleticism, you should probably be on the team. Fast forwarding a little bit though, you 4 years at Nevada, where you're one of the top rebounders in the country, you really prove that you belong on the college basketball scene. And you try the route to go pro basketball. I believe it was at like summer league in the NBA, but nothing seemed to be coming to fruition for you having a job in the regular season. There's options to play in Europe. How do you sort of, figure out like how hard is it to not pursue that dream and then go back to school instead?
No, it wasn't hard at all, because, once the NBA said no, and I had offers to play overseas, it was easy, because I wanted to play at the highest level, period. Like, that's just my mentality, and so getting to play overseas didn't excite me at all. So it wasn't difficult not to do that part of it. It was difficult to cope with the fact that the NBA didn't want me. That was difficult to deal with. But for as not playing basketball, because I'm always that person. I want to play at the top. I want to be at the top. If I'm not at the top, I don't want to play. I want to play the best against the best competition in the world, right? And so when the football coach, when I went back to Nevada to finish my degree, when the football coach said, "Hey, you may have a chance to play against the best people in the world," it's no brainer. It's like, let's do it, And so that's what I get excited about, which obviously translates to business as well.
Of course. So that moment though, of being like, do I really want to give up basketball and try this different route? I mean, was it just sort of like you felt that basketball door was closing, and because this unknown is starting to open, is it like one of those quitting your job at Wal-Mart thing? Like, hey, what's there to lose?
Well, I realized basketball wasn't even it. Like, and just like I realized football wasn't even it. It was the game. It was the ability to compete against the best in the world. And so the satisfaction of doing that was what I was looking for. It wasn't tied to a singular sport or a singular thing. It was just tied to an emotion and feeling that I wanted to experience. And so it was easy to do that.
All right. But so I want to just get this clear now. So at this point, you're 23, 24, playing your first season of organized football, your last year at Nevada, because you have that 5th year of eligibility. Yep. First time in 10, 15 years that you're playing organized football. Is that right?
Yes. It was crazy. It was tough. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. In fact, I always tell people this story. I had a group of my teammates kind of pull me to the side because I was just like stinking it up, man. It was horrible. But it was a big deal at our school because the media came out, basketball star turns football player, and I'm like terrible. And so the guy was like, listen, man, you can go overseas and make money playing basketball right now, man. Like, you just need to go do that. And it was one of those defining moments because for me, I never quit anything before. And also, I never believed that I couldn't do it. And so I was like, no, I'm just going to stick it out. Ended up sticking it out. The last game of the season, I made my first tackle, and so season ended. And I'm like, it was a cool experience. But I always tell people when you do things and you do it all out, like something always remains. Like it's always something happening behind the scenes that you can't see. Right. And the reason why the football coach even approached me, right, is because of the way I played basketball. And so he saw something in the way I competed at basketball. And so how I competed at football, even though I wasn't doing well, it was still something that remained of value that someone could see. And that's what happened. And so the scouts was like, well, what about this guy? Like, I know he doesn't know how to play football, but the way he's participating and with the ability that he has, there's something there.
And that is what the NFL is all about, projecting that collegiate talent, what they'll be at the next level. You can light the world on fire as a college athlete, but if it doesn't, as you know in basketball, if they don't think that you project right, they're going to pass on you. Meanwhile, the guy that might not have shown anything on film, if he has the measurables and he can project well, he's going to get the look. And sure enough, this time around in football, it worked for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say, sorry. Also, most people don't realize this, but it's your behavior, right? So when you're not the best and things are not going the greatest, it's your behavior that tells the story of who you are and what your character is. And then that allows people to determine, can he build on that? Like, can he actually, we know he has the ability, but we're looking at his character. Like, how does he perform? Like when he plays one play, like I played 12 plays in college football, right? But you can see that like every single play, whether I knew what I was doing or not, it was 110%. Right. And so there was something there that they could build on. And so people don't realize that, but people are paying attention to your behavior all the time, especially in those adverse situations.
Absolutely. So you don't go drafted, but you call from the Cleveland Browns. You showed enough with all the scouts there at I would imagine something the equivalent to a pro day at Nevada. Yep. Can you just talk a little bit about the learning curve now again? So now you're going on year 2 and you went from playing with guys your age to grown men that are getting paid to essentially kill the guy in front of them. Yep. How did you up your game now again when you're still working on refining your craft?
Yep. So fortunately, I was a phenomenal athlete, very agile, 6'7", 270, but I was just agile, really but the other part of that was I had a great coach, right? And so this is where I learned business, believe it or not. And so my coach would say, so we would come out every day for training camp, and my coach would say, okay, and he would call me big fella. So he said, okay, big fella, today, all I want you to worry about, and he would give me one technique. He would say, say a cutoff step, right? Work on the cutoff. Right? Don't worry about anything else. You're going to get reached. All this other stuff is going to happen to you. It's going to look horrible. It's going to be bad. But I want you to perfect this one thing. And we'll do this every single day. This one thing, right? And so that taught me how to learn, right? Like we want to learn everything at once and be able to do everything, and so it's a process to it. And so I would start learning these little techniques and these little steps, and I would do them over and over and over, like a million times, until eventually I was able to play fast, super fast. And then the coach was like, wait a minute, this guy has a chance, right? But it was how I was digesting the information and then processing it. And it was in these little pieces. It wasn't just, I couldn't have did it if it was everything at once, because everybody I was competing against, first of all, the team only kept 4 defensive ends. 3 of the defensive ends was former first round draft picks, new contracts. The 4th defensive end he led the team in sacks the year before. There's no more spots. And then you have this kid who just basically signed as a free agent, played basketball, don't know anything about football, right? And so how do I make that team? Like somebody has to go. Who's going to go, right? But it goes back to that whole competitive piece. Like I believe pound for pound, skill for skill, ability, I was better. I may not have been more experienced, but I believe I was better. And so my behavior every day was in that regard. And it was undeniable.
So cool. So one last football question in here for you, because, it's very, nice that you're building up and it's one step at a time. And it's just sort of like, okay, well, where are the results? NFL Europe. So for basketball, it didn't really make sense, but NFL Europe, you get a chance to now go overseas and play, and you won Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah.
What was that like for you to actually see the fruits of your labor?
So funny story. I didn't want to go to Europe, first of all. I wanted to stay and train with my coach, but they made me go, right? It's like, you going. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so they sent a group of us, and it was like 4 other guys that played my position that went to ACC, SEC teams, and they had experience, and so we all had to train and work out together. And so we were one day in the locker room just kind of talking about what we wanted to do for our accomplishments, and I just said, I was like, man, I want to win defense MVP, I want to lead the league in sacks, and they all just burst out laughing. Literally just burst out laughing. They were like, man, what are you talking about, man? Like, you just learning how to get in a stance, like that type of thing. I love that challenge. That was something that really fueled me. By the second week of the season in Europe, those guys were calling me like, man, what's going on, man? You're getting sacks all over the place. This is crazy. Like, they were trying to figure out what's happening. And literally, I committed myself. I didn't go out. I wasn't playing video games. I wasn't doing any of the things that everybody else was doing. And I was locked in like a hermit, man. I was locked in, watching film all the time. And I just dedicated myself to accomplishing it. And it happened, Ended up with defensive MVP. My team competed for the World Bowl, had 9.5 sacks in 10 games. It was a phenomenal experience.
It's awesome. I want to transition now just to more the business side, from the NFL and then onward what you've done. It's 5 training camps that you go through. And while you ultimately do decide to retire when you start to battle with injuries, you do have a real, from what I can see, a pivotal business moment where, I know you've said before that the NFL and your experience really allowed you to, open your eyes to the business world. And you're seeing all these different aspects from negotiating, the marketing, but you end up asking to be released from Cleveland, and you had to give over a little chunk of change to do so, if I'm not mistaken. So how did that go for you?
Yeah, so so it was like $500,000, but it was one of those things, man. Like, in life, you have to decide what's more important, right? And our coaches got fired. We got new coaches, and they changed up the defense. And they basically let our whole defensive line go, and they ended up going to Denver. And they kept me because I was one of the younger guys, and I had a lot of upside. But I didn't have a position because they changed the defense. And so I'm literally playing out of position, and I'm down here grinding it out, man, with these huge offensive linemen, two gapping, and I'm like, I could feel my body breaking down. And then one day I was like, man, you know what? I'll go back to Walmart. Like, let's start there. Like, I'm literally that person, right? Like, I'll go back to Walmart, start over, and do it again before I do something that I really don't want to do in this regard. And so I went to the coach, man. We had a straight up man-to-man conversation. I was like, man, I don't want to be here. Let me go. It's like, you can go, but here's what the tag is. It's going to cost you this much, And I was like, and so we ended up working it out. $500,000 later, I ended up in Denver.
The fact that you bit the bullet too, that I have to imagine so many guys who have thought about that never go forth with it because they'd rather just keep the money. But when your principles are a little bit different and you care about other things more than money,
yeah,
you make the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, my mentality is always like, if I did it once, I can do it again. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in the same arena, but success. If I accomplished it, if I've tasted, if I've created it, I've produced it, I can do it. It's infinite. And so I believe that much in myself. Even if I wouldn't have got picked up by Denver, I believed I was going to be very successful. And I think when you live that way and you believe that, your behavior can map to that.
Yeah, and that leads right into Qwerkz, which isn't to say that you haven't done other things as well, but because this is the thing that I've seen the most and I'm really intrigued by it. First, how did you originally take this idea and then build it into a business? And then also, can you explain there is more? I love those 3 words. And,
Yeah.
and I know that that's the message behind Qwerkz, but can you just dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So how everything started was I started getting guys just kind of reaching out, asking questions. Like, so there were a lot of athletes that kind of were seeing some of the things that I was doing, and they were just asking me like, how do you do this and how do you do that? And eventually I started seeing like, it's like, man, it's an opportunity to really connect a lot of dots. And then on the business side, there's a lot of money to be made in doing so. And because one of the things that I realized was when you become a former professional athlete, your stock obviously dropped, right? Like you're not as, sought after, you don't have the same value, on the market, that type of thing. But what I always knew was one singular athlete, former athlete, loses a lot of value. But collectively, if I show up and I say, well, listen, Qwerkz, we have 7,000 athletes that we were helping and participating in. 7,000, right? Like, so I knew the numbers would give the value back to us, right? And so my understanding of that, I saw big business. I was like, wow, this is something that we can really do a lot of deals around, and we can leverage each other to be able to do that, right? And so the there's more part was really kind of created around the idea of a lot of guys get so lost in their own minds when football is over, right? And I made a post about this yesterday. It's almost like people always tell you to, turn the page or close the chapter. And when you do something phenomenal, and I believe this, when you do something that almost nobody else can do, right? Why do you want to close the chapter? Like, why do you want to turn the page, right? Like, and so it's perspective. I'm a big perspective person. And so the perspective is, I may not play football anymore, but I don't want to close that chapter to make that a separate part of my life, where it's like a funeral, right? Like somebody died. Like, no, like I'm going to build and extend from that, right? And so that's always going to be alive and a part of what we're doing. And I'm going to build on top of that. And using that perspective is that chapter remains open. Only chapters I close is the bad ones. Like when it's bad, I'm like, okay, turn the page. The good ones, I'm like, let's keep building on this good stuff, right? And so it's our perspective, and that's kind of how I use it to keep the mind frame that I need to be able to go out and just keep doing it over and over again.
Very cool. And part of what you're saying is making something that J.R. Tolver said resonate in my head, and that's, you got to keep the main thing. And I think he was saying, 95% of your energy has to be in that main thing for you to, if you're a professional athlete, if you want to keep that going. Yep. But it seems like, and I'm not trying to say you weren't giving it your all, but it seems like you were giving more than 5% of your time to thinking through these different things. So, what is just your ideas, for a current athlete? How much of that time and energy should they really be allowing to look at other opportunities, business opportunities out there?
So I'll tell people this, when it comes to your sport, you're going to give what you give to it, right? Like, so if you're a person that's really dedicated to it, you're going to give a lot to it. And so you don't take away from that time. But you know what time you can take away from? The leisure stuff. And you have plenty of time. Like, people lie to you and tell you don't have a lot of time. But think about the thing. I tell them, like, think about the things you're doing when you're not doing football. Just do less of those things. Like I knew guys who would go out every single night. Like that's insane, right? Like, and so think about how much time they used on just partying and hanging out, or just just doing stuff that wasn't productive. Sure. And they didn't even have to take away all that time. They could have probably took away 25% of that time and put it into something else, right? And so you have plenty of time, is what I'm saying. And so it's not taken away. And I think this is something that a lot of athletes have a hard time with, because say I'm doing something really cool outside of sports, and then say I have a bad game. Well, my management and my coaches are like, well, maybe you should be doing less of those other things, right? And so you get that pressure because they know you're doing other things other than your sport, but you have to stick to it because you're more than your sport. That's why I said there's more. Like you're more than that, and you can't get boxed in.
Exactly. Now, I've heard you say that athletes want to be entrepreneurs. And for the record, I agree, but I want to play devil's advocate for 1 second here. There's a little bit of debate going on Twitter when it comes to looking at quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Are they a chef or are they baker? Do they follow the recipe, go through the progressions, or can they just make it happen?
Yep.
Is there an argument to be made that some athletes are just better suited to be employees because they're so used to being in the regimented, this time do this time do that. This is what your job is. These are the tools to get it done. Are they a baker? Are they a chef?
So what we do at Qwerkz is we do a really deep dive assessment on our athletes because we understand everybody's different, right? And we also understand that your strongest qualities and your best attributes are yours, uniquely yours. And so sometimes when you're in an environment like a sports environment, you can take on a persona, right, based upon being in that environment, but that may not be your true natural, state, right? And so to kind of answer your question a little bit, yeah, like everybody's different. Like some guys are suited to be entrepreneurs, some guys are not. Like for me, when I went to Ranger College, we didn't have a strength and conditioning program. We didn't have coaches to do that. I created my own. I trained the guys that are on the team with me. So I've always been a leader in my space and doing what I'm doing. So when we do those assessments, we can see all of those things. And so we can see the guys that are entrepreneurial, and we can see the guys that are more suited for maybe management or, in another executive type position. Like we can see all of those things and we help them understand that because a lot of times you don't know who you are. You think you may be one thing, but you don't necessarily know, right? And so to really answer your question, it just depends. Like, I mean, everybody's different. Some people are, some people aren't. But what we really see is there are less entrepreneurs than they are other team player, role player type individuals, right? Being an entrepreneur is totally a whole different type of vibe, right? Like it's something that you have to be really geared to, and you have to be a little bit insane, you really do.
For sure.
Everything that's happening, you have to believe something different a lot of times, like than what everybody else believes. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, sort of reject the status quo, but as your life story kind of shows, that's something that you really have no problem with doing, and that we're all thankful for it. Yeah. Now, one thing though about those people, particularly ex-athletes or even current athletes that have that personal brand, which is the very easy, sexy thing to talk about. How do you navigate sort of reverse engineering the brand into a business, which, if you're an entrepreneur, obviously you got to be nuts to even think about, but how do you sort of take what someone thinks of themselves and that image that they project and help them sort of work towards this business might be a good idea for you?
Yep.
Is there even an easy answer to that?
It's not an easy answer, but the path to it is interest, right? So it's like, what is your deepest interest? And so you start there. Because it's not about doing the thing that's popular or what, it's like, no, you have to do something you really have a deep interest for and you really care about, because you're going to have to do it a lot before you have success. And so if you, just like you're talking about your podcast, because you love doing it, you don't mind just grinding it out and doing it because you're going to do it anyway. Right. And so I tell guys, do the thing that you would do anyway. And so turn your hobbies into a business. The things that you just want to do all the time, find a way. Some guys love video games. So like, well, is it an esports play there? Like, what can you do? Right. And so that's kind of how we help them map to where they need to be.
For sure. Now, as we get towards wrapping this up here, one thing I know that's very important to you is being impactful with your time, which is something that, resonates with me as well. Do you just have any sort of high level, how do you ensure that you're using your time best to make the biggest impact possible?
Yeah, I think for me, it's all about impact. So I think impact before I do anything, right? And so, for me, it's like, who is it going to impact? How is it going to impact them? how long is it going to impact them? And so I think that way before I do things, because I want to make sure that I'm doing things that are aligned with my values and what I'm trying to put out into the world. I'm constantly pushing out into the world. I'm constantly sharing. I'm constantly giving myself, but it's in the same vein as being impactful. So if I do a video, right, that video, the idea behind the video that I do and that I put out into the world is to have a certain level of impact, right? And if I don't believe it's going to have the impact, I won't do it, right? Or my company, right? If I don't believe my company is going to have an impact, I wouldn't create the company, right? And so everything is about, can I create something that's going to have a huge impact? That's going to satisfy me, because that may not work for everybody else, right? Like some people may say, well, I don't really want to have a big impact, right? Like I just want to do my job and live life, and that's fine. But for me, back to what I said earlier, I want to play at the highest level.
It all comes home.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Now, I got two last questions for you. One is, you're not afraid to pivot. So maybe not specifically with Qwerkz, but what's Corey's vision for where he's going to be 10, 20, 30 years out? Because I know you want to play at the highest level. What does the highest level look like when you extrapolate what you're doing now that far out?
Yeah, it's really hard to forecast, because as you know, the things that you do open up and show you new avenues and create new opportunities. But just on the business side in general, I could see myself owning multiple businesses, being in the merger acquisition space, because I am an impact person. And so whether it's even acquiring staffing firms or different agencies to help other people be able to accommodate their lifestyle around employment and things like that, that could be a possibility. But everything is about expansion, right? And so it will be something around the acquisition of companies and businesses for sure.
All right. And to wrap this up, what's the best piece of advice you could give out there? Normally we ask specifically for young athletes, but because you are a man that wears many hats, what's just your best general piece of advice that you could give to someone?
So this is an easy one. And so if you notice about me, like everything I do is built around my skill set. And so I communicate really well. I'm an ideal guy. So I'm a perspective guy. So everything is around that, right? And so it's just like if you were to tell me I got one play, this is the last play of the game. Tom Brady is driving down the field. They're about to get in the end zone, and I have to get to the quarterback. I am going to give you my best move. And so my advice to everybody, every day, as much as possible, give the world your best move. Period. That's it.
That is it. That's it. There's nothing more than that. Corey Jackson, impact person. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.